group member. I've asked a group member to speak for us today. Um, so I'm looking forward to hearing her story. I'd like to welcome Gwen L. Let me unmute you here. There you go.
Hi, you guys. I am Gwen. I'm an alcoholic. I've never actually done this before, been a speaker at a meeting. So my great hope is it's pretty pedestrian stuff. I just hope I don't bore you all to tears. So to start with a real eye popper, I grew up in a smallish town in Connecticut on Long Island Sound, about a 45-minute ride out of Grand Central Terminal in Manhattan. And to paraphrase the line from Little Big Man, for a kid, it was a kind of paradise. It really was. It was a lovely little town to grow up in, and my brother and I had a lovely early childhood. You know, there were kids baby booming all over the place around the neighborhoods. We were so free range in those days. We practically lived at the beach in the summers. It was nice. It was great. We didn't have much money, my family, but you know, we had enough. And a lot of the dads in town, not all of them, but a lot of them commuted into the city. My dad was one of them. And most of the moms, again, not all of them, most of the moms stayed home. It was a really different century in those days. And my dad had taken a degree in English from the Wesleyan University, which he attended on the GI Bill after the war. And he chose to go into the advertising business. So for those of you who've seen Mad Men, the TV show Mad Men, I'm here to tell you it was a fairly accurate representation of the culture on Madison Avenue in those days. And the trouble started when he started to get a little more successful at the biz. And what had been latent alcoholism became very, very blatant. And the thing about my dad was he was a really nice guy. He really was a nice guy. Everybody liked him. He was the favorite dad in the neighborhood. He was great with kids. Kids all adored him. And it was just astonishing and horrifying to see the transformation that took place in this man. The bile and the anger, and oh, so articulate with it. My mother was equally articulate. And the battles, never fisticuffs, it never turned physical. They did not need to punch each other, to tear each other to shreds. So by the time I was about 10 and my brother was about 8, the battles began. And she was drinking too much at the time, although not an alcoholic. In this phase, she definitely was. And it was a horror show in the house, you know? It lasted, I'm not even sure how long, a year, maybe 2 years. I know I was about 12 and he was about 10 when the divorce finally came and my dad left. And in a lot of ways, this was a great relief. Okay, we didn't have to listen to that anymore. But my poor mom was a basket case. She was just, you know, she had only worked a couple of years when she got out of college before she got married, and then stopped, as many, many women did in those days, and stayed home to be a mom. So she had no confidence in herself re-entering the job market. She was terrified she wasn't going to be able to cover the household expenses, and he was absolutely not to be relied on for any support. Few bucks now and again, not to be relied on. So the atmosphere was a tad fraught in our house in those days. And my brother and I had kind of opposite but equal reactions. He went to work. Seriously, 10 years old, he grabbed the lawnmower out of the garage. He's up and down the neighborhood, picking up yard work, shoveling snow in winter. By the time he was 14, he had an actual job washing dishes in a restaurant. And I, meanwhile, just gave up. I started to just deconstruct my life. I thought, well, shit, you know, if the rug can be pulled out from under you so definitively and the world can just come tumbling down your ears through no fault of your own, what the hell's the point in anything? I see now it was anger. I didn't feel it at the time, but it was rage. And rage turned inward, we know, especially in us women. We know that turns to depression, and I just gave up on everything. I started skipping. By the time I was 14, I was skipping school a lot. I was smoking a lot of pot. Then came the great acid summer of '69. I was stripping more often than I wasn't that summer, as were most of my friends, and as were many, many of our friends in upstate New York in August of that summer. That was great fun, it really was. But when I got to be 18, I got my first job in a restaurant. They had just lowered the drinking age in Connecticut from 21 to 18, because after all, we're sending these kids off to be killed and kill other people in Vietnam. They should be able to have a beer before they go, right? So that had happened. And I was introduced to alcohol, and I became instantly enamored of it. I loved that feeling. I was kind of a shy person. You know, front of restaurant work is, okay, it's a lot of timing, it's a lot of physical labor, but it's a lot theater too. And I wasn't a very good actress. So the booze helped me to construct a persona. Both, I mean, we all drank a little even while we were working in those days, but then of course after work, pooh, all bets were off. And this continued for years and years and years. So, you know, I'm going to kind of skip over most of the drunkalogue, okay? I mean, other than to make 2 points, and that is when I was in my 20s sometime, cocaine got into the mix. And the thing about both of those substances is they really feel like they're helping you to create this persona. I was hollow inside. I didn't have a persona. I didn't know who the hell I was. And this helped me put on face and carry on. So, and the other one is there was promiscuity. There was a great deal of promiscuity. So 30 years later, and 21 years ago now, I started dabbling in this recovery stuff. And the thing about it, I hear a lot in these rooms about how hopeless people were when they came to AA, that they were utterly hopeless. In my case, it was quite the other way around. I finally had some hope. I was fairly newly married, and this man was just so kind to me, which was a really big difference from the guy that had come before. And I wanted to be worthy of that kindness, and I wanted to be a better person than I actually was. And I had fooled him, really, really fooled him. If Tris is here, he'll be able to identify with this. I mean, sure, I met him in a bar. You'd think he'd know. He didn't know. He didn't know. I was crafty. I mean, if I was going to really tie one on, I didn't go to the bar. That was private. I did that at home. And I could carry it off in public and with him. Okay, once in a while, yeah, you get a little tipsy. Anybody who hangs around in a bar and drinks will get a little tipsy once in a while. Anybody can have one too many, sort of thing. He really didn't understand the extent of it until I finally moved in with him, which I had put off for a long time because I didn't want him to know. And he took to saying gentle things like, well, you know, maybe you could just lay off the wine like till I get home from work, you know. Meanwhile, my doctor had been working on me for, you know, about a year, gently. And he had connections with a really good rehab over in Oakland. And I said, okay. Then he scared me with a liver test. And I said, right, we're off. I'll give this a try, you know? So that's how I went into it. And, you know, like all good rehabs, I had to have the medical detox and everything. I was, and the physical recovery was just astonishing to me. That's where my pink cloud came in. I honestly hadn't remembered that one could feel that good. And I loved it. And I wanted more of that, you know? And they stressed that we're not curing you here. This was a thing I knew, but doesn't hurt to hear it more. And so they said, you're gonna be a lifelong alcoholic / addict. You're probably gonna need some lifelong treatment, which does not have to be burdensome. And if you get into it and keep up with it, you'll find it's gonna be the opposite of a burden to you. Okay, so I was gonna give that a shot. They had in-house AA meetings. They took us to a couple, and they also had Rational Recovery came around and made their pitch. that struck me as a little, they were kind of new in those days. That struck me as a little new wavy, kind of amorphous. And I thought, nah. I knew a fair amount about AA. My dad finally did gain long-term sobriety through it, and also a good friend of mine, both stone atheists, and both told me, and other people told me, sure, give AA a shot. Don't let the God stuff throw you. So I was forewarned on that. And right from the start, I started learning how to go serpentine around. But I got to tell you, I had a little trouble with the meetings over in San Francisco at first. I didn't know where to go, so I went to one of those great big club type places, where they have all of the different organizations, the narcotics and overeaters, everything, and meetings all the time, big meetings. And I didn't receive any kind of warm welcome there, I came to understand that they had seen so many people wash through that place. A lot were court ordered and a lot just dropped out. They weren't really going to have anything to do with you till they'd seen you come around for a while and learn to talk correctly at an AA meeting, But I went to other places. I did find a sweet little step meeting way up at top of Pacific Heights somewhere in the cliched church basement, small meeting. They recognized me, I recognized them. I had no idea what they were talking about. I wasn't working the steps in any manner. I had asked one woman to sponsor me and she said no. And I said, well, all right then, I'll figure this out myself. And I didn't do it very well, but I kept going to the meetings and I stayed sober for a couple of years there, just on the strength of that. Until there came the day that one day, without any conscious thought at all, on my way home from a meeting, I bought a bottle of wine. And when I got home that afternoon, I drank it. And I hadn't had a drink in a healthy body in so long that this feeling, about 2 glasses in, here it came. And I said, oh, fuck yeah, now I remember. Now I remember. But I have been warned about relapse. And so, I did that one afternoon and I wasn't going to do it anymore. But I hadn't allowed myself conscious thought about it, you see, and it was lodged there. And I did continue to do that off and on, staying mostly sober. So time comes, he retires, we can't afford San Francisco anymore. We decide to move to Mexico. And we did, sweet little place on Lake Chapala, about an hour's drive outside of Guadalajara. Fairly sizable expat community there, mostly Americans and Canadians, sprinkling of Brits and Europeans. But very, very Mexican place. And I had your classic geographic relapse. I mean, full on. And he was drinking too much right along with me at that point. Newly retired, he was just pulling out all the stops, so forth and so on. And I kept that up for something like 3 years until I was just right back there and crawled back to AA. And they have a wonderful group there. A truly wonderful group there who did welcome me. I literally hugged me and stuff. And where a sponsor volunteered herself to me. I had my friends had outed me at one of the meetings as not having one. And she came up to me afterwards and said she would be honored if I would accept her as my sponsor. She was a sweet lady, good-hearted, long-term sobriety, and she was one of the people for whom God finds parking spaces. So I said, that's so sweet of you, but our worldviews are so different. I think maybe, she said, you want to tell me what difference that makes? And we kind of, we did the steps. We kind of took the first 3 as read, but she took me by the hand. And for the first time, I finally did steps 4 through 9. And I was the better for it. Yes, the traditional AA steps. I blew off 6 and 7. And in fact, the sponsorship relationship just sort of naturally wore away. There was no firing on either side. It just stopped. And so, I copped 3 years sobriety that way. And then we decided that we'd had enough of the Mexican adventure. It had been about a little over 6 years. And meanwhile, my stepson had to go back to California to be able to afford this house that he wanted to live in Florida. And he had some bad tenants in there. So he wanted to get rid of the tenants. And we were ready to bail from Mexico. And he said, well, hey, here's an idea. And that is how we ended up in this little corner of Florida where I could not find a meeting, a niche in a meeting for love nor money. I just couldn't do it. There was no going serpentine around the God stuff in these meetings. And I had to drive and drive all over God's green acre to get to him. I had to get my license over again. I had managed not to drive for 15 years voluntarily. I don't like driving. By some strange quirk, I never gotten busted or hurt myself or anybody in a car driving drunk, which I did a lot back in Connecticut. But anyway, I said, okay, well then, okay, I'll just have to coast. I'll have to coast, you know, with what I've built up and I should be fine. And I wasn't fine because the relapses began again. They were short, 2-3 weeks at a time, maybe twice a year, but there they were. And I wasn't coping well. I wasn't dealing with them. I wasn't saying, why does this keep happening? I wasn't. I was just saying, okay, I'm going to stop this now. I'll be all right going forward. Eventually it came about that my husband got sick. It happened gradually over years, but we thought it was just the aging process. He was considerably older than me, and it turned out not to be. So when the deterioration really sped up a few months before he died, I pulled my shit right together. I mean, I was stone sober through that whole thing, taking him hither and yon while they tried to figure out what was going on with him. And we only figured out it was cancer, I don't know, 3 weeks before he died, something like that. When they released him, they discharged him from the hospital into hospice care on a Tuesday. They had given him a prognosis of probably less than 6 months. Well, he died 5 days later. Luckily, his son had come down. His son had been in the habit of coming down from Tallahassee. He finally made it at least to Florida, and he was working and living up in Tallahassee, which is about a 4-hour drive from where we live. And he'd been coming down every weekend, hang out with his dad, and, we'd have dinner Sunday night, drive all the way back. So he was coming down that Saturday night anyway. And so he was with me Sunday morning when his father died. And a half an hour after the man breathed his last, I asked my stepson Doug to bring me a glass of wine. And I didn't stop drinking for 3 months. It was the first time in my life I had actually drunk for the oblivion. My conscious goal was to blot out these unbearable feelings of tragedy and loss and terror at the void ahead of me. 69 years old. I'm not in the greatest health. I don't have the energy or the imagination to start over again. I didn't know what was to become of me, and I didn't want to think about it. And then came the pandemic, boom. And in the wake of that, Doug lost his job up in Tallahassee. So he moved in with me down here. And here we were, rubbing along together. We were doing okay, trying to prop each other up. He was horribly sad. He adored his father. And about 3 months in, with plenty of suicidal ideation, I decided, okay, I've got to make a decision here. And I honestly don't know if I would have come to this as quickly as I did had he not moved in here, but it was mortifying to me. I was no use to him. And he was, like I say, he was just as sad as I was. And I was no fucking use to him. And I thought, okay, I'm going to weigh this in the balance. Do I live? Do I die? Anne Sexton said, live or die, but don't poison everything. And I thought, in order to give this living thing an equal weight, while I weigh him in the balance, I got to sober the hell back up. And I called my friend that I had made in the Mexican group. I called her up. Don't worry, I'm a few minutes from leaving you alone. She had been a good friend and tried to teach me some Spanish. She was my Spanish teacher. And I said, damn it, I'm going to have to go back to one of these wretched local meetings and find me a sponsor and get back on track. You know, I've got to figure out what's my next step. She said, why on earth would you do that when there's Zoom? I said, when there's what? Holy shit. along came Zoom. I was able to reconnect with my group in Mexico. I got another sponsor from that group. We redid the steps. I did them on a much more, on a much deeper basis. And way led on to way from that meeting to the next and the next. I was doing meetings all over the place until my dear friend Liza brought me to you guys. And thank heavens, because secular AA, well, as I say, while I worked my way serpentine around the God stuff in AA, and I don't have a hate on for traditional AA the way I understand a lot of people do, and I understand their points, but I don't. Still, the secular approach and all of the information that you guys give and all of the sources of finding stuff out and just listening to you has really reinvigorated my desire to find out more, to maybe bring myself back, at least see this out with a little grace, if I can carry it off. So, like I say, I hope I haven't bored you to tears, and just, with the standard disclaimer that it's just a suggestion. The topic that comes to mind in my case has got to be relapse. Your experiences with it, your avoidance of it, how you managed it. A few things I would say about it are, I don't recommend it. Re-sobering up sucks out loud. It's a terrible way to get on. But I didn't lose anything. Here's the thing. Here is one gripe I have with AA. Oh, you've lost all that sober time. No, I didn't. Stuff sinks in. Stuff's there in the back of my mind. I'm just not making use of it. I do, after all these years, find I have more patience, including with myself. I have come to the understanding that everything except death is temporary. And I tend to err on the side of compassion and kindness. So, as I said, still don't recommend relapse, but I'd be interested if anybody feels like sharing any experiences they might have had with that stuff. And now I will shut up and leave you guys alone. Thank you for listening. Bridget, thank you for asking me.